Hey everybody, you're listening to and possibly watching the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
And I'm Steve Morey.
And we are your hairy heavy homos that talk about comic books, but you don't have to be a hairy heavy homo to listen in or possibly stream in. You notice that we don't have brother Caleb this week. He is off doing Arkansas stuff. I don't know how else to characterize it. But you'll notice that we have a different handsome gentleman in this box or this box, depending upon your vantage point there. And this gentleman is Jeff Klein. And if that's a familiar name to you, it might be because of his video series like Beer with a Queer and Outside the Comedy Club. And Jeff is someone who has recently performed in the San Francisco Comedy Competition, the DC Comedy Festival, and the Queen City Comedy Experience. Jeff is witty, sarcastic, self-deprecating, and hilarious. And if you attend one of his shows, you'll listen to hear him talk about his life and not fitting into his community or his clothes anymore. And Jeff is going to be taping his first comedy special, which is titled Fatty Gay, in the early part of September, and he's here to talk about it. So for tonight's show, we're the comic silent book bears for a little time. Jeff is also a comic book fan, and we're going to be talking with him about the funny books a little later. So a little different kind of vibe for this episode. We hope we're going to have a lot of fun because Jeff is a lot of fun. And Jeff, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. I'm breaking the show. I heard comic bears and I was like, I'm in. And then I just don't read past the first word. I didn't see that at all. I don't know what books are. I'm real happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited. And your heartfelt intro felt like you meant it and not that I wrote it. And I like that. That's really sealing the deal.
Yeah. Well, there is a very frustrated talk show host that never talk show hosted, in here. So there's it's something I do. So, all right, we're off to a good start. So, Jeff, as we were talking before the show, because other people don't know, we talk before the show a little bit. There's a pre-show that it's very exclusive.
Very exclusive.
Very exclusive on the StreamYard. And talking with Jeff about the format, and Jeff kind of, just threw it out there. Oh, it's my origin story. So we're going to go into your origin story. We're going to go into two different origin stories, depending upon the multiversal streams that we'll be talking about. And the first is you as a comic. So why don't you tell us how you got into stand-up comedy and all that?
Yes, it's a tale as old as time. I was trying to do acting for a while. I grew up loving stand-up comedy. My parents introduced me to stand-up comedy. I watched the Comedy Central half hours back in the day. I sat and watched Eddie Murphy Raw with my parents because they're good parents. And I turned out fine. And so love stand-up comedy, but I was trying to do acting at the time. And I was an okay actor unless you read the reviews of the movies I was in, and then you will read otherwise. But I was actually in Provincetown, and my boyfriend at the time and I were in Provincetown, and we were hanging out with friends, and they said, what's new? I said, I'm thinking about going to an open mic to see what stand-up's about. And they got me 5 minutes on a show that week. And so then I had to write 5 minutes of material and perform it. And I figured I'm in Provincetown. I'm never going to see these people again. And that was wrong, apparently, because one of the people in the audience is actually, conveniently, it works so well into tying everything together. Has a song called Nerdy Bears. He is a staple in the bear community. He's a musician, Tom Goss. If you guys ever know him or seen him.
One of our, at this point, I would say occasional guest hosts. We kind of call him the He's our Silver Surfer. You know how the Silver Surfer whenever
Comes
he's
in,
around,
yeah.
he's a defender, but he's not around that much. Brian, he knows Tom pretty well, I think.
So Tom and I did a movie together just that year, and then the year that I tried stand up, he was in Provincetown for his song Bears, and so he was there, and so we've stayed in touch since. And so you got to see my first time performing. Because that was my first time, and in that moment, my origin story is this: in that moment, I went, "Oh, I don't have to memorize a script of what other people wrote and said. I just go and complain about things that bother me. I'm just going to do that. That sounds way easier." And that's why I do stand up instead of acting.
It's performative complaining. Is that?
Yeah.
So performative complaining. There you go. Okay.
All I have to remember is what's bothering me. And I was like, that's easier. That's way easier than learning a script. So that's what got me into it. And then 10 years later, I love it. I absolutely love it. I love the writing part of it. I love the being clever, the storytelling you get to do. I love the people I get to meet. I mean, speaking of comics, I'm just going to keep tying things in to make it feel like I belong here. I got to work with another queer comic, Jay Jordan. If you guys know of Jay Jordan, hilarious comic. I love his stuff, but he also wrote for a Marvel comic. He did one of the stories in Marvel's Voices, I want to say, and he did a story in there with Iceman and Storm. And what I love is when you're reading it, you go, "Oh yeah, Gay Man wrote this," and yeah. So I did a show with him, and I had him sign the comic book and everything. Which everybody was there to see him do comedy, and I was like, "You're signing the comic book that I bought. This is. I know that we're comics together, but you're signing this before we leave." So I love it. I get to meet people like that. I get to go around. I get to go to different cities and do stupid stuff and complain on stage and get paid. It's great.
Now, you had mentioned you were watching Eddie Murphy with your family and Comedy Central specials. And in terms of influences, who would you say is up there on, fairly high on the list, whether it's stuff that comes out in your comedy or not?
Yeah, any male comic who has been canceled influenced me at some point. And then looking back, I go, well, I shouldn't mention their names at all. But there's there's a reality to my brother and I had the cassette tape for Bill Cosby himself. And the chocolate cake for breakfast bit is just one of those unbelievable. It's an everyday, you can laugh about it, kids and so on. So my influences were things that what I gravitated towards were things that I was like, oh, that's so relatable to a lot of people. So like Jim Gaffigan's Hot Pocket bit, or Jay Moore used to have a bit about that every house has magic soap. And he goes, if you don't think that's a magic bar of soap, think about where you put it. And think about your mom and dad use that same bar of soap. It better be magic. But it's just one of those like, oh, it's just an everyday, these are relatable. And so then I just wanted to, when I started writing, I wanted to write kind of relatable stuff. And then I got tired of doing that. And then I just started writing stuff about me. And then finding that more people relate to it than I thought. So even just everyday stuff like this is something that affects me. When you say it to a crowd and you find out like, oh, there's more than one person that feels that way. Whether it's about myself or like, I'll give the greatest example in what I'm finding. My lane I'm trying to find is I categorize myself as a beige gay, if you will. And immediately you get an idea of what a beige gay is just by saying it. But
he's right across from you. Yeah.
But it is one of those, and it's funny because what I get is I make the comment on stage about like, if the gay community is a box of rainbow glitter, sparkly and fun and exciting, I'm the beige glitter in there. Like, technically I'm glitter, but it's not exciting. And what I have found though is the more I do that and just be honest about who I am and how I fit in to this community, the more other kind of beige gays are like, oh, that's what I am. That's how I relate. And and then that audience kind of finds me, which is great, which is kind of the dream, really, at the end of the day.
Now, I've noticed in most of your bio material, you characterize yourself as a native Floridian. I imagine some of the comedy about being a Floridian kind of writes itself, and I was wondering if you could address that.
It does. It does. I don't think Florida's any crazier than anywhere else, and that I may be biased, but in reality, most of the crazy that happens here are people from Ohio that just moved down. But, I mean, I'm just saying. Just Casey Anthony was not from here. Okay, she was from Ohio. Yes, OJ Simpson lives here now, but he was not now. Now he's dead. We brought it down. But I think it's just one of those. I do, as I travel and I get out and I see more places, and I get to experience more places like Minnesota, Dallas, even LA, and so on. It is one of those. I go. I think what's happened in Florida, what happens for us in Florida is Florida still has a belief in, and this is going to sound, God, I sound very conservative saying this. Florida, and this is just because I was in LA for 6 weeks recently and I saw the stark difference. I think Florida, has a big tourism community. Obviously, it's all tourists. And so for comedy, that's great because I'm constantly, my material's working on anybody in the US because anybody in the US is at the show. It's not regional necessarily.
Right.
And I think that happens a lot for comedians. If you're a Midwest comedian, you're really good in the Midwest because that's where you're playing to those people over and over again. Whereas in Florida, you're playing to Midwest, Northeast, et cetera, because that's who's here. It's all tourism around by the beaches where I live. And then the other thing that Florida, we still have this belief in winners and losers. And it's a little cutthroat because of that. Like you need to be good and better to get stage time, to move on, to do things. And when I was out in LA, I was noticing like, oh, we just let anybody on stage sometimes. And LA just wants everybody to have the experience. And I was like, but not everybody deserves it. And then I was like, oh, maybe that's a Florida way of thinking. That's weird. Oh God, am I a problem? Which I am, but not for that. I just so yeah, and then I do. Yes, Florida's ridiculous in a sense. It's funny. The second special that's being written already with a lot of material I already have is stuff like talking about what happened. Because Hooters started in Florida. We have a ton of strip clubs in Florida. We used to have women in tea bags selling hot dogs on the side of the road in Florida. And it was such a problem, they had to put a law out to stop it from happening. So for me, that was just growing up. Retrospect, I'm like, oh, Florida is a bit problematic. I get it. I guess it makes sense. So not every city had that? Okay, well, that makes sense, I guess.
Not everybody parks on their beach.
Yeah, so that is something that you learn. But even, because that's really on the East Coast when I went to Daytona, and I was like, so we're just driving trucks on the beach here? Yeah. That is just all right. There is just a bit of
rolling right up.
To it. Yeah. Yeah. Which I do realize the more I get out and about, I'm like, oh, okay, I was raised a bit different. Yeah, that is true.
Okay, I tend to bogart interviews, so we worked out a system where it's a little weird now since it's just the two of us, Steve, but where it's almost a relay race and we hand off a baton. So I'm going to hand it off to Steve for a little bit to take you through some questions. So, Steve, what do you got for Jeff?
Well, first, we do have some people joining us. So we've got James Figueredo, who has mentioned beige gay, I'm dead.
Oh,
yes.
I killed somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Somebody
dead now. Sorry, James.
Rest well.
Okay. But he did also say good evening, handsome gentlemen. So, in his dying breath, he called us all handsome. So thanks, James.
That's admissible in court, just saying.
Yeah, it is. It's been written, it's on the internet, it has to be true. So with your stand-up, I mean, obviously, you've played in a bunch of different clubs all around the country. And I've seen a lot of stand-ups now really getting their there's stuff out there a lot on the internet through YouTube or Instagram Reels and TikTok. And also you have another segment or series, video series, I'll call it, Beer with a Queer, which is also really awesome. Alongside with the stand-up, a lot of your videos, when you look yourself up, you find a lot of Beer with a Queer as well. And what got you into doing that? Was it just sort of like adding content to put out there, in support of your stand-up, or just, hey, I really love beer and I want to tell you all about it?
So, yes. So the reality of that is the process nowadays for stand-up is not what it was in like the 90s and 2000s. And in anything, right? And just in general, it's social media driven and content based and follower driven. And as frustrating as that is, I can rally against it all I want as being the old man I want to be, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to change it. So I got to figure it out. And that is one of the things that is part of being a comic nowadays is being a full-time editor and content and having to put stuff out consistently. And I was told once by a comic out of New York, his name is Jared Freed, who's hilarious. He became very famous for, he started by critiquing charcuterie boards. You would just send him a charcuterie board and he would roast it or give us a critique. And so that was just a very niche thing. And then he would recap The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and that was just something he would do. And it was constant content that was driving views and people and so on. So when I worked with him once, he said, you have to do two things. You have to be consistent, and you have to be naive enough to think people care about it. So yeah, naive enough to think people care and consistent until they do. And I was like, oh, okay. So shortly after that, I was trying to figure out what to do. And one friend suggested that I do a thing called Wine with Klein, because I've been a bartender for years previously and so on. And another gay comic out there was already doing a wine thing. And I was like, that doesn't work. And then I was like, oh, but a slight step aside, so I don't have to ever give her credit, I can do Beer with a Queer, and it rhymes still, and rhyming so important. And
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I have a history in bartending, and I do like beer, although if you watch the videos, you may not believe that. And then my idea was it's weekly as much as it can be. I need to get back on doing it more weekly. I think we just hit 140 episodes. So it's been going for a little while. And I literally am picking beer based on how pretty the can is. I want to try something. I want it to be the other thing I did was I do video editing. So I had a written show called Outside of Comedy Club that I did, like a little episodic 5-minute episode thing. And it was multicam and it was edited together. And on something like Beer with a Queer, I thought I want to do one take, no edits. This is it. This is me trying a beer for the first time. This is whatever's on my head that I want to get off my mind. It's an a la minute thought. And so it's simple, and it's all 5 to 7 minutes, and it's been fun. It's been interesting. I try a lot of different beers. People have sent me beers. Somebody wanted to send me a beer from Australia. I told him he was dumb, because that's got to get really expensive to do. And then he looked it up and he was like, "No, it is. I'm not going to send it."
Yeah.
But I've had friends from North Carolina and Dallas have all sent me beers, which is great. And I was like, oh, that's a weird thing. And then I'm just giving my address out to random people online. So that's probably not smart, but it's fine. And I was like, it's probably just a beer they'll send. I'll be all right.
But they might shake it up before you open it.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But it was to create content, and then it's become something more. And now I find it interesting when I go into a town, the people that have already seen episodes of Beer with a Queer before ever meeting me, and realizing that it's living on in its own. People don't. When I meet people for the first time and they're like, "Oh, I know you from Beer with a Queer," and I go, "Why?" Because I was like, but you don't know me or owe me money, so I don't know why you watched it. But I am accepting that it lives in its own realm now. It lives in its own universe type thing, and it lives on its own, and it's finding people on its own without me, which is kind of an interesting thing and something I'm like, oh, so what I was doing for content and consistency is actually becoming people like the interviews I do on there or what I talk about or my opinion on something. And then some people have even written down the beer recommendations, the 4 that I've liked out of the 140. It's a lot. You know who has pretty cans? IPAs and double IPAs. You know what's a disgusting beer? Double IPAs. And I fall for it every time.
I mean, maybe it's the prettier the can, the worse the beer. So they need to have something that you can look at to appreciate. Because you're going to be spitting out the swill anyway, right? So.
Yeah, you may as well enjoy the can at least if you're not going to enjoy the beer. But that's kind of where it started. It started as doing something, whatever the something would be, and it's become more. And I was like, oh, so now I'm excited to keep doing them because I'm excited that it's. I used to get 100 views every week. I'd be happy. I'd be like, oh my God, I had 120 views. That's amazing. And now I think the last episode was like on Instagram is like 1,400 or 1,500 or something. And so it's just one of those, it's still not much, but it's more. And so I was like, that's, people are watching, people like it. It's been fun. So I like to keep doing it. I keep trying to think of new things to bring people other than just, my jokes.
So OnlyFans is the next step, I see. So
yes, I'm going feet first, and then we'll go to OnlyFans.
Get on that list, the feet list. Apparently, like there's a whole thing, like a whole subsection on the internet about it.
A friend of mine, female headlining comic that I work with all the time, she is on TV a lot, and she's on that website, and she jokes about it. And that's when I first heard about the website. And I was like, no. And then I looked her, I just wanted to be like, is she joking? Is she actually on there? And she was. And then I felt really creepy because I was on the site and finding, and it was just a whole, I was like, what have I gotten into? What is my algorithm like now? Not that I'm judging people. Not that I'm judging.
Absolutely not. No judge. Kink shame-free zone here. We do have a couple other suggestions. If you were to say have a companion piece to Beer with a Queer, Vince Tenebra here has suggested Suds with a Stud.
I like it. I like it.
And then got some laughing emojis from this gentleman who just so happens to be my brother. Just happens to be. But yeah, so I think that's really cool. It is one of the things that I've noticed a lot over the past not even 10 years, like the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Just the explosion of the social media presence of stand-up comedy and comics who go on to also highlight other things, other interests, which is really great because it kind of encourages and brings people around to see you also not just as a comic entertainer but also an all-around entertainer,
right?
Somebody
it shows really multifaceted. You get to learn other things, which is nice. Yeah,
and it's almost sometimes like that they do stand up as kind of like the cherry on top. For I'm thinking like Charlotte Dobra, that
right.
She has her own thing, but the comedy is something very different. Who's the wealthy woman? Who's that Steve that we like?
Oh my God, she's wonderful. She and her brother are both stand-ups. But she does a lot of videos. It's
and then
now.
Interspersed with the comedy takes, which are something very different because I imagine there's things you can do in that format that probably wouldn't lend itself to an extended stage experience.
That's definitely
it's very interesting. It's a very interesting time, and it's almost it's almost like kind of like a punk DIY thing that's happening now. It seems that where it's like you're creating your own landscape, and if people connect in something that there's just like different avenues for exposure, and I think that that terrain in and of itself creates new forms of entertainment, for lack of a better parlance than forms. But
No,
it is really
I
interesting.
think
It's a really interesting time.
I think that's very true, and I think what it also has done is it lets your audience find you easier, which is nice. But you hit the nail on the head with there are sometimes, and I'll speak for every single comic out there because I've talked to a handful of them. But there are times like a comic will come up with an idea, and then you know the idea is funny, but there's a reality to, like, is this a tweet? Is this a sketch? Or is this an actual joke I can take on stage? Because they're different, So, like you said, it gives you another avenue to, kind of showcase something else. And sometimes the things that we think of that are funny, it's like, yeah, that's really funny, but it takes a lot of explaining, and that doesn't work on stage. But it would look great if we did it as a sketch or something, and so that it just gives us other avenues, and like you said, other venues to show that. Yeah, absolutely, that's real.
Yeah. So, when you travel as a comic, where have you found the best audiences? I mean, it's kind of like a lame question, but it is kind of interesting when you talk to somebody who does stand up in different venues across the country. There's usually a very different feel, and you kind of described it perfectly with Florida. Everybody's come, from elsewhere to come and see you, but when you're in those regions, you're pretty much playing to a home audience. What's where do you find a good audience or the best audience?
It is, and that's curious. I think the answer to that depends on your comedy and your style, and that's what I really like about going to different regions, because you see the brand of comedy that's coming from there. So, like, there's a real quirkiness of comedy that comes out of Kansas City. When I was in Kansas City and I'm watching these comics, and I was like, oh, you guys are doing it just a little different. And there's a little bit of a quirky to them. And then Minneapolis is really good. They have a great comedy scene, and the crowds there. It's almost like the better and I don't know if it's a chicken or egg thing. The better the comedy scene, the better the comics coming out of there, and the better the audience is. That's one of the things is, like you said, what's the best audience? And sometimes an audience needs to be trained. And unfortunately, a lot of the crowd work videos that are going out are training audiences, in my opinion, the wrong way. They're making the audience is now going like, I want to be a part of a viral video, so I'm going to go help by yelling at the comic, and it's like, don't. But I have a lot of fun in North and South Carolina. I do a club in Greensboro, and they were fantastic. I had such fun there. And Dallas was okay. Houston was pretty fun. LA, it's funny, going into LA, I was like, they may not like me in Los Angeles because I may cross lines, because they may be too sensitive there, because there's a lot of paying attention to make sure people aren't insulted there, and that's even on stage. But I found that they related to me fine, and I had some really good shows while I was out there. So I can't say that I found that, but I could see that it could happen if you were less adept comic, if you weren't as critical on the writing as I try to be. But yeah, my favorite ones have been, I would say Minneapolis. Those guys, they were great, and then North and South Carolina both were a lot of fun. And I think it's and I joke about things in North and South Carolina about the South, like I call out the flag and so on. And it's weird when I do that joke outside of the South, even in Florida, but especially, the crowds get real tight. But in the South, I feel like they can laugh at themselves. They don't pretend like we don't know what you're talking about. They're like, well, yeah, that's us. And I think it's less taboo to talk about. So that makes it a little bit looser of an audience, I would say. I would say one of the worst audiences is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. They are rowdy and ready to just, like, they are rough. If you mention anything that starts like with a foot, they go into football, and that turns in. They want to. It was a very chatty, rowdy crowd in Chattanooga, Tennessee. In least shocking news, my comedy may not go great in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but yeah, what? But yeah. Those are the places I've had some of the most fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
interesting you said about the phenomenon of audience becoming part of the product, and there certainly are a lot of comics that seem to post as many heckler videos as they do of their own work now, which I can see that's that might be good in the short term, but in the long term for the medium, it probably isn't a good move. Since you've been doing this for a while now, I hate to bring in politics into that, but did you notice a change in audiences from a certain time that a certain candidate was elected, of that as a kind of dividing line, or was that maybe something that was a bit more gradual? Or
I can tell you it was not gradual.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was once Trump became a candidate and started running, the ability to make a political joke. I will tell you the reality is his name is the polarizing. Now you can still make political-ish jokes. There's a good amount of people that do them. I have like literally one in my set, and it really runs down the middle type thing. It's clever more than anything else, more than making a statement, but it's very clever and very good. It's very braggy. It's fantastic. But in it, I call myself a Democrat, and I say I'm allowed to do that because I actually am one. And you can still feel the room tightening. All I did was say that I'm a Democrat, and the room still gets a little bit tight. Sometimes somebody may call and the heckle is just Trump, and it's like, well, that's not. You're just saying a word. But once he became a candidate back then, to date, if you say his name, the room shuts down in a weird way. The people that love him get very tight because what are you going to say about him? The people that hate him get very tight because they don't want to hear it will suck an energy or change an energy in a room in an instant. And it's weird that one name can do that much type thing.
Yeah.
Where and to the point that, like, if you start making fun of Biden or Kamala, it still creates tension in the fact that people think you're going to bring up Trump next. Like, it's such a overhanging aura of it, and it definitely it was not gradual. It was as soon as it started, the rooms changed, and it just took it out of it, and you just can't. I don't feel any reason to bring it up or say it because, again, once you do. Yeah. Now you're performing a different show at that point because the room's different. But no, it's definitely palpable. You can tell it as soon as it happens.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Really... No, I was just gonna say it's like if you're probably thinking of the same comedian that I am who really does post a lot of the heckle and the talk back, and that usually takes a very, very political turn, and so when you're watching that, it's kind of difficult to extract the rest of routine or the rest of a set from that situation, from that conversation that then happens and then is it's put out there. Yeah, I mean that is kind of difficult, and I like how you said that the audiences are being trained and have been trained. I mean, this is something where when you go to a comedy show, and there's a lot of really great documentaries that talked about this, especially looking at the Comedy Store out in LA. Like that was, they kind of talked about how
that docuseries was great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. Like just going like the different rooms and like what kind of audience is in each room and what they expect out of their comedians. and what they want to see versus what they get and how they react to it.
Mhm.
It's very interesting, and that's why I was kind of like when you talked about LA. I am really curious about that because there is that very sort of it seems like the audiences there would be extra critical of everything just because it's like, well, we know what we want and what we expect, and if
Mhm.
you don't give it to us, then that's it. Then we're done with you. But
And
yeah,
I think
I mean, with it,
they may be trained like that, and that's just a
yeah,
reality. That I think if and that may be one of the differences. If the comics there are know that that's something they need to be aware of, and then they're writing as such, right? So then that audience is training the comic, and the comic is then back training. It's creating a cycle. And if I'm coming from Florida, where we don't think about that or much,
yeah,
and then I just go into LA and I'm just doing my jokes again. My jokes are I being a gay comic performing to predominantly straight rooms. I've had to learn how to write a joke so it's not too far one way or another, so we can all
mhm,
laugh. I'm laughing at myself, you're laughing, but we're not making fun of. If that all makes
Yeah.
sense.
yeah,
It's a tightrope I've had to learn how to
Yeah.
write and work around. So because of that, and I'm not going to say every Florida comic is like this, because the reality is, if you didn't have to overcome the things, if you didn't have to think about writing like that, like I had to in these rooms, your jokes may not be as tightrope walking. So when I take that joke into LA, which typically that audience may not be ready for it, or the comics may not be wanting to do something like that, and then I make a joke, and I'll give you a quick example of it. I make a joke about being a Democrat in Florida, raised by liberal parents. They're so liberal, they're trying to abort me still. And so that is a touchy subject, touchy. I finish the joke by saying that I want to get rid of the joke, but they tell me I'm not allowed to. So that's my political joke. Now, again, actually makes fun of both sides going on right
Mhm.
there, makes a
yeah,
tiny little statement in there. Nobody can really be upset at that joke. I cover everything in it. That
yeah,
type of joke probably wouldn't be written in California because you're aware the audience is, you can't say abortion in California. That would be insane. You can't make fun of it, blah, blah, blah. But that joke worked in California because I wasn't trained not to do that on those audiences. So sometimes that's I think the good thing about getting out of your city and going to other cities is you get to see, and those audiences get to see something else and
Mhm.
they're like, oh, well, maybe we can laugh at more things and so on.
mhm,
So
yeah. And Bill, I think you were going to say something else.
Well, no, I was just going to comment on something that you had mentioned about, how you, the way you tailor the writing, not to harken back to the political thing that I brought up, but,
yeah,
for a long time, um, things have changed a little bit, but, the adage was why conservative comedians didn't work is punching down isn't funny.
right.
Whereas punching up almost always is. Um, but it's also interesting that you were talking about that because it sounds like you like the punching up is also you punching yourself, and that must be an interesting way of approaching things.
It
Yeah.
so it is, and I think what happened for me is, and stay tuned, everybody. We're getting to the comic book soon. I think what happened what happened for
They
me
need a break too.
was I
Yeah.
I was I was trying to do just plain comedy like everybody else, and then just wanted general, like we said, matter of fact, relatable to everybody. And I could watch my friends go on stage and just talk about their relationships, and the audience is just, you're on board, you're going, it's fine.
Mhm.
And then if I tried to do that, I lose the audience. They're not paying attention to that joke as they're processing what they heard. And now they have to decide, well, do we have a problem with gay people or not? Now, where are we at in do we? So then so I had to think, how do I write around that? So now, then at that point, I was now, okay, I have to add a joke about me being gay that now we've got the information. We're still laughing about stuff on the set. And so that's when I had to start figuring out how to write so I don't lose an audience and I'm able to keep
Right.
going and not lose a step in everything. So that was one part of it. But then I had to start thinking about, I also don't want to get a cheap laugh that is at the expense of the community, because I owe the community more than that, right? So I then have to pay attention to what I'm saying on stage and not just being like, oh, let's laugh at gay people. And it's like, well, no, we're not going to laugh at gay people. We're going to laugh at that I feel like I don't fit into the community. Well, that's something we can laugh at because we can all laugh at that. That's something personal type thing that I can put in a comical way, in the beige glitter way, right? A beige gay. So then straight people can get on board and go, oh, like, I'm not in the gay community, but I can understand that. I can understand maybe not fitting in. I can understand. So that's where my kind of maybe overthinking, but overwriting came in, where I look at some other comics, like I said, friends of mine that are straight, that can just do, for lack of a better term, figuratively and literally, straight comedy. And just go up and just do the joke and not have to overthink it. And the blessing and the curse is, curse is I have to overthink it, but the blessing is I'm a much better writer because I've had to overthink it for 10 years. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I mean, it is one of those things, yeah.
Yeah. The very exciting thing is your first comedy special.
yes.
And I'm just going from my experience, you see there's gray here. I'm old as sand. And I kind of predate that a little bit. I was like, my first exposure to what would have been the comedy albums. And the first one I remember, which is effectively a comedy album, was the video that went along with Robin Williams for the reality What a Concept. You mentioned Eddie Murphy, child of the 80s. I can recite everything from Delirious and Raw, backwards and forwards. So in terms of comedy specials, now that you are conceiving your own, what are some that may have been a big influence? Not necessarily in format or the terrain that they cover, but just in the general vibe. Like, what are you going for, in a sense? If you can just provide some examples, just so that there is a reference point, that would be great. I'm always fascinated by, just like Caleb's always fascinated. I'm fascinated by, what grows in your garden,
Right. Well,
so,
I don't see how that's any of your business.
You ain't getting any in my seed. All right, fine.
I would say, because there's certain, like, when you watch a special and you're like, oh, that was the way it's put together. And I think that's what I really focused on my first special here is, I remember when I did my first 45-minute set, I wrote all my jokes out, and then I thought, okay, so that's all my jokes. How do I put them together? Because I wanted it to tell the story. And the special that's standing out in my mind is Eddie Izzard, Dressed to Kill. In my opinion, one of the top 5 specials of all time, one of the best hour specials. And it's great because the way he tells, it's not a story necessarily. They're unrelated, but he keeps it flowing. He brings things back throughout the whole special. It's just very well crafted. The jokes are great, the stories are great, but it's well crafted. And so that stands out in my mind as, I want something that's going to be well crafted. And then outside of that, I think of specific jokes in other specials. Like John Mulaney has a joke about Back to the Future. If you've never seen it, it's worth Googling. And it's, what I love about that joke is, by the way, speaking, like I said, I love a good problematic comic. The great thing about that joke is he spends so much thought process and time breaking down the concept of Back to the Future. And it's not just the concept of the movie, but the concept of the guys pitching the movie, explaining the concept of and it's the minutia of it, but it's so well done that I'm like, that's the type of longer jokes I want to do. How do I do that? And then where does that go into the set? So so that, I mean, I love all your classics. It's the comic friend of mine, mentor, once told me, you comics boil down to two camps. Your George Carlin, who's esoteric, speaking very intelligently about broad problems and creating solutions in a very comical, real way. It's a thought process, right? It's thought provoking. And then there's Richard Pryor, who is on stage telling his truth. And by the way, like I said, love problematic. But it's these things that are real to him that have happened to him, and he's being extremely raw on stage. And those are your two extremes, right? And so I want to find that balance between like all of these things. Everything I talk about in my special is real and has happened to me. And it's just kind of drawing them all together. And then how do I take all of that and put it into something that would be interesting to listen to for 45, 50 minutes. And it's funny what happened with this, what kind of built this special from all of my jokes is my friend's 3-year-old, little Sophie, was at my ex's house. We were all over at my ex's house for a little cookout type thing. And she was learning French. And she had just learned how to say that she was tired. And of course, we get over there. My boyfriend Matt and I get over there. Kara's already over there with Sophie. And Bob, my ex, just goes, "You have to ask Sophie how to say tired." And I was like, "Are you tired, Sophie?" Because she's learning French. And the French word for tired is like our word fatigue. But it's pronounced fatigue. But when you're a 3-year-old saying it, she looked right at me and went, "Fatty gay." And I was like, "Well, that's rude." That was a trap that I fell into, and it's rude. But immediately I also went, and that's going on stage at some point, and you'll get no royalties. And so I created that into a joke, and I created that into a thing. And then as I started putting together the idea of a special, that joke kind of became the linchpin. So it's almost like the first half of the set, I talk about the pitfalls of being out of shape, and you're going to the doctor. And as I would assume both of you know, what your friends and family say when you shave your beard off, and how they feel about it. These are all real things that we have to deal with. Yeah, it's hurtful what they say to you. And so the first part is kind of the fatty part, the talk about that and how clothes don't fit and so on. And then the second part is me talking about dating my boyfriend from the South, and some perils of my ex that I had, and so on. And so it's kind of the gay part. I talk about the relationships with men and so on. So all of a sudden I was like, oh, this joke, if I name the special that, it's a play on words, it's fun, it helps describe me, and it kind of maps out what the special is. Without me having, kind of creates its own map for it. And now I can just plug and play. So that's how this special got kind of created, was this overarching concept of like, what jokes go with what. And then this joke kind of became the umbrella that everything could fit into.
Steve?
Yeah. How are we going to transition to comics from that? I mean, that's...
But just like that, if you remember, Bobby Drake once said,
this all gets taped in one night? This is all getting taped in one night?
The special. So, no, I'm doing what's my friends would term stupid. What you should do in a special is you tape it over multiple shows, at least 2 shows, and so you have a chance to. If the first show didn't go great, if you messed up something, you have a chance on the second show. You just wear the same clothes. You usually do it in the same night, so it's just one after another. Set looks the same, everything's the same. You just do it. I said that's too easy. So I said, who would do that? So I thought it would be good to capture more of an audience. I'm doing it on Sunday, September 8th and Sunday, September 15th. So if you're out of town one weekend, you can make the other weekend. That makes sense. The problem is I need to live in a bubble between September 8th and September 15th, so I don't get hurt, so I don't look different, We need to reset the stage so it looks the exact same. So it is going to be more complicated, and we want it to look the exact same. It'll be cut to look like one show, but in reality, most specials are cut over 2 shows, just to give you coverage, to make sure everything gets done, and all you get the best pop from this joke. Okay, we'll go that way, and cut between. So, and then my goal is to put it out on Amazon for everybody to see, and I will most likely not charge for it. If you have an Amazon Prime, you'll just be able to watch it, because I just want as many people to see it as possible, and obviously leave compliments, because I am needy for compliments. So just putting that out there for anybody still in the chats. If we could keep those going, that would be great. But yeah,
just compliments.
No, that's the plan on it.
Yeah. I mean, with a stand-up special, I mean, that's always a really big, I get a really big way of getting your self out there, your comedy out there in a very long form way. And I've actually been really happy to see a lot of comics be able to do that. Starting out by doing a lot of like stand up everywhere, but really, getting onto the social media train, being able to push like different clips and just getting their likeness out there, and then being able to do a special to really kind of bring it all together. And
I've always likened that. I've always likened that you put singles and then there's an album.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's it's singles and then you have an album. You have a full album there. Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it.
Individual issues of a comic book. What? Drew it right in there.
Oh,
there you go. And then you collect it into a trade paperback. It is great.
All right, brother, you brought it up. So you said you're also a comic book fan. Tell us about how you got into comic books.
I mean, I got into comic books like everybody, right? They were awesome. I grew up as a big X-Men fan.
A gay man reading X-Men. Oh my god!
I know, shocking news,
it's
right?
Wild.
It's almost like I felt it was written for me. But it's almost like I connected to it in a weird way.
Or thought Wolverine was hot.
It was Cyclops and Cable. Side note, we talked earlier about the 1994 swimsuit edition, which happened. By the way, can we just talk about like that happened?
Yeah.
It happened. Mm-hmm. Well, there was 3 separate editions of that. There was like a 99 one and so on. But the fact that Marvel was like, you know what, our people want to see Punisher just wearing a skull over his crotch. It was such a wild like issue that Marvel was just like, yeah, here's Cyclops in a thong. Here's Storm and nothing. I was like, why am I masturbating to a comic book? It was wild. I mean, JCPenney catalog took a break that day. But I got into with that.
International Mail. I hardly knew her.
Right. I got into X-Men, got into X-Force, and then I remember being a big Spider-Man fan. I remember I think my most prized issue, and I have to go into the attic in my parents' house, but it's an attic in Florida, so I'm not in a rush to get up there. I have this great issue. It's my favorite ones. It was an anniversary issue of Spider-Man and Venom. And Venom, I want to say at the very end of it, jumps over fire, big deal for Venom, to save Aunt May. And Spider-Man and him kind of make a truce at the end of the comic book. I want to say it was like the 40th anniversary or something like that. But yeah, so I loved all of that, and it was just one of those. I was a big fan. And then I got out of it a little bit, and then I have recently, actually, my boyfriend and I recently have gotten back into it. He is a big Masters of the Universe and Transformer fan, and so there's the new run of Transformer run that's come out that he is actively getting, and he just recently found all of his old issues. So he has like the complete first run of Transformers that he just found, which is very exciting for nerds like us. And and then I'm getting back into I was trying to find what's something different to start reading, because when you get back into it, you feel overwhelmed. You were like, how did I find out what I liked earlier, right? Like what, and you try to getting back into X-Men. If you haven't been back into comics in a while, then you just start looking at X-Men. You're like, I don't know. Where do I start? So yeah, we briefly talked. I just started reading Feral. I was like, oh, that's different. It's something a little bit different. So I was reading that, and but yeah, so that's how I got into it, and then I've always been a fan over the years, and I'm happily getting back into the tactile part of it. So I'm excited about it.
And it seems that the area that you live in was known at one time for another publisher that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is CrossGen. So let's hear your CrossGen story.
Let's talk about CrossGen. I've been teasing them with a CrossGen story. So if you guys don't know out there, CrossGen at one point was like the third largest comic book. They were distributor. They were massive. I mean, I don't know about massive. They were a big title. They had comic books like Way of the Rat, which was very cool. The drawing on that was incredible. The artwork. Do you have one of those?
Yeah, but keep talking with your story, because I think it's better if I introduce what I have later.
So here's how I learned about CrossGen. I got a call from a friend of my dad's, and she was like, hey, do you want to come audition to do a voiceover role? And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And I didn't want to go by myself, so I just grabbed a friend of mine from high school who did a bunch of plays with me. His name is Adam Cody. He's a year younger than me. I was like, just come with me. We'll have some fun. And I was like, I got a booming voice. This is going to be an easy sell. Let's do it. What CrossGen was trying to do, they were the first company to put digital comic books online that had voiceovers for all of the dialogue. So when you signed on to CrossGen Comics or whatever, and you went to the issue and you would flip through the pages, it would have voiceover for all the dialogue. And they were the first comic to ever do that. First comic book company to ever do that. And the first comic that ever did that was Ruse comic, which is like a Sherlock Holmes with magic involved in a different universe. And so when you go in for a voiceover audition, I learned this is my first time doing it. They just give you a list of archetypes. So it says superhero, villain, little boy, little girl, old man, weak man, woman, and it has something to read, just a phrase next to it. So then I go into a room with just this lady and a camera, and that's it. And she goes, all right, so, go ahead, go read through it. And I'm like, superhero, come here, little boy, come here. And I went through everything. And I was like, I nailed it. And then this is to date, she goes, okay, this is the note I got, and I'll never forget it, and I'll never forgive it, because it made no sense to me, and she kept saying it. She goes, let's go back to the superhero one. And I was like, yeah, we are. And she goes, say that one again. I was like, all right. And I forget what it was, but let's just say it was come here. I was like, come here. And then she goes, okay, this time, can you do it more like Harrison Ford? And I was like, in the moment, I was so wrapped in my head and not understanding what she was asking from me, because she just said, can you do it more Harrison Ford? And I couldn't think of what that meant. So I just did it again. And she went, no, more Harrison Ford. And I went, cool. I didn't know what that meant last time, but just say the same thing again. And then in the moment, I couldn't think of a single Harrison Ford movie. All I could think of is his cameo, one appearance and one line in American Graffiti. Why is that the only thing that popped in my head? I have no idea. I clearly have seen 100 Harrison Ford movies at this point. This was mid to late 90s. Clearly, I have seen other things. That's the only thing. And it was like, do you want to race, kid? And I was like, I don't know how that's helping me. And then I'm concerned about how I can't think of a Harrison Ford. So I kind of lowered my voice more, and I did it again. And she went, no, more Harrison Ford. And I was like, I don't know what that means. Stop saying the same note over and over again. Looking back, I think she wanted it more gravelly, which is a better note to give to somebody than just Harrison Ford. So I just got frustrated, and I kept doing it, and she clearly got frustrated. She was like, oh, that's great. We got it. And I was like, I don't think you did. And I left. And then my friend Adam Cody went in. And Adam Cody is just, like I said, he's from Florida. He's a year younger than me. We grew up together. He did some acting in high school like I did. He went in, did his thing. We leave. I don't really hear from. They do call me and they offer me a role as Constable 1 in Ruse, which is the very first line in the very first Ruse comic. Constable 1 says something. I don't remember the line. And so technically, I'm the very first voice you hear on the very first ever dialogue added voiceover comic book online. That being said, they wanted a British accent, and I can't even tell you a Harrison Ford movie, so British accent was not happening. What I did learn was apparently my friend Adam can do a British accent because he did the whole run of Ruse online. He was hired as the lead guy in it, and went on to do every episode as the lead in Ruse. And I was like, I brought you along just so I didn't have to drive by myself, and you book the lead? I have continued to be jealous for the next 20 plus years it's happened. So, but yeah, so that is my cross-gen story. But fun fact on cross-gen that we talked about briefly that comic book fans may like to know is this was a point in time, this was mid to late 90s, I want to say. This was a point in time where Marvel and DC was piecemealing out things. So like the characters would be drawn and then they would send it to the colorist, and then they would be colored. They would send it to dial, and it was all being sent. It would be done and then sent somewhere. And CrossGen wanted to put everybody back under the same roof. So you had Way of the Rat cubicles, 4 things next to each other. You had a Ruse section. And so that was kind of a cool thing because you could see how that would create like, oh, well, how are you doing this? Because that may affect how I do this. And it was collaborative, and it was creating that everybody's working next to or near each other. And I thought that was a cool, they spent money to do that, to bring everybody in and do that. But it was, maybe that's why they went out of business. But it was cool to see that they were trying to bring that back. I really respected that. So that's my cross-gen story.
So you're a big supporter of return to office mandates. I understand.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
So, no, that is really interesting because I remember hearing a lot at conventions when they were talking about things like coloring and inking and all of that. That in that time frame, Marvel had especially Marvel had gone away from like the whole bullpen concept and just really like, okay, we got to farm this out. We got to we were hiring this company to do the coloring. We're hiring these these people over here. Like it's just you send it to this artist sends it to that artist, and that from there to really decentralize the process and try to, I guess, to increase the volume that they're able to put out. I'm not really sure what the
it was saving on money. It was saving on overhead because you wouldn't have to have
office space.
It also but the creators there had very restrictive contracts. They basically could not work anywhere else.
Right.
And that was one of the things where you when you did have big names like Mark Waid and George Perez, it became a problem when they were offered big projects elsewhere and they just could not work around what they had. So my what I wanted to show was, since I'm a pack rat, never throw anything out, I have the DVDs that were collected of the online material that Jeff just mentioned.
Really?
Yeah, you will be happy to know that Ruse was never issued.
Okay.
But we do have Meridian, Negation, Scion, Sojourn, and Way of the Rat.
That's awesome.
2 volumes of each. Yeah,
it's wacky.
Yeah,
that's so cool. So you don't have my Constable #1 great line.
You don't have your Constable #1, but just to rub it into the friend that you brought, he didn't make DVD like Way of the Rat. And then and also that format, the effectively motion comics, both DC and Marvel have attempted to do it. It never really took off. But
Dark Horse did it too.
Dark Horse did
with,
it too.
Buffy, yeah,
and I think there is a Hellboy that is in that format.
There is.
I think there is a.
I think
Hellboy format. Yeah.
what I respect from CrossGen is they were just trying. They were trying something, right?
No,
Like it was just a company that was like,
new.
let's try something. Let's try to be innovative. And I think at that time, innovative wasn't. There was a lot of status quo happening. That was the machine was churning, and why change? And I think it was cool that I was a toe in the door on something on a company like that type thing. It was just kind of cool to be. I could look back and be. I mean, I'm still crazy jealous and angry at my friend, but it was cool that I got to be in those offices and try to be a part of something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And they made a lot of smart moves, whatever, they were very active in listening to what retailer complaints were about the big two. And they established very close relationships with a number of stores, getting products to them way early, sampling, providing samplers. And also, Steve, I think we've talked about it. They used to have books like Edge where they would collect like 4 different issues of current comics, and they were like kind of in the manga size format, so that you cater to the collector edge in it, but it's not the flimsy comic book. It's something that's a bit more respectable, or at least at that time.
Right.
It's a bookshelf. It's a bookshelf book as opposed to a short box book. Like I think that is definitely something where a few companies kind of saw that as an in, especially looking at how popular manga started getting, and that still to this day remains. That's definitely something where you can have like, hey, I've got a bound book, and I can put several different comics in it, and you can put it on the shelf, and it looks neat, but it also hooks people into actually being able to read different stories and different, follow different, different series. But yeah, that's pretty cool. CrossGen unfortunately was becoming popular and was doing all their work while I was not reading comics. that was my gap. Like my gap decades were really between like 95 and 2010. So unfortunately I missed out on a lot.
Well,
sadly.
You don't have to spend a lot if you want to enjoy it. They ain't expensive. So.
Oh, but now I gotta, now I've got to find time to read them. So that's
that's impossible. Yeah, no, that's
exactly.
absolutely impossible. Well, you mentioned reading comics, so why don't we, Steve and myself, talk about some current comics? And I know I have a hook in for my book if you've been reading Feral. And Steve, I think you definitely have a hook in if Jeff has been reading X books.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's start with yours.
Oh, okay, sure.
We'll start with
yours. Speaking of X books, Jeff, you mentioned that like it's really hard when you're jumping in when you haven't been reading, especially X-Men. I think X-Men more than anything else at Marvel. If you haven't been reading X-Men for a while, how many reboots and how many like world-ending plot and mutant shakeups that have occurred since the last time you read X-Men, it can be almost impossible to tell what's happening, what's going on. Well, recently Marvel just had the entire Krakoa saga, and they just finished with the Fall of Krakoa in in June, and so now in July and August we're getting brand new number ones. They're starting everything over again. They've just wiped away the past 5 years. They mention it quite a bit, but they're like, we're not going back to that. And so now that you have the new status quo in all of the books. And so they've actually been bringing back some of the titles that haven't really been in play or have been in play in very different capacities over the past 5 years. And one of them is X Factor. And X Factor, I have to say, was one of my favorite X books when I was reading X-Men as a kid. So I loved the original X-Men team, but I had only read it in sort of classic X-Men reprints, usually as referred to, because most of X-Men Classic, when they were being printed, concerned themselves with like the new X-Men group from 1975 and on. So they were always referred to like the original students, and here's the original 5 and all of that. And when I discovered X Factor originally, I went back and I was reading back issues and seeing how that original group of 5 X-Men, had grown up. Like, this was their Nightwing moment. Like, they were an independent team, they were doing their own thing, they were kind of government sponsored, but they also had like these crazy adventures, a lot of them involving Apocalypse, and all these things were happening, but they were adults. Like, they were really something that had kind of like thrown off their original. And then of course they had the Muir Island saga, and X-Men essentially rebooted itself again in the early 90s with Jim Lee's X-Men and the new Uncanny X-Men Gold Team and all that stuff. And that's where Peter David came in with his new team of X-Men led by Havoc, with Polaris. Rain was in it. It was a really great, strong guy, random character, Guido, strong guy. But it was just, it was a really great book and a great title, and
a great concept.
With all the great concept. It was fun.
Yeah,
it was fun, but there was also a lot of emotion into it because Alex was always unstable for something or other, and Rain had a lot of very severe trauma that she was constantly slashing things to try to work through.
Yeah, and I'll always maintain that was the best written Quicksilver ever.
Oh yeah. I mean, Quicksilver, like, almost as a character, like, almost didn't really belong there, but he fit in with this group, and it worked. After years of being like on the Avengers or whatever, but it worked somehow. And that was a really great time for reading X books. Since then, they've been rebooted multiple times. There've been multiple versions of X Factor. Peter David came back and wrote all new X Factor several years ago with some great art by D.G. Domenico. It was just really, a great book, but it never lasted. Since the original run of X Factor, there really hasn't been, well, I take that back. During the time that I was not reading comics, there was a long-running X Factor series. But since I started rereading, getting back into comics in the early 2010s, it really hasn't been able to last very long. Like, they would have to stop, restart, reboot, have a new series, new volume, blah, blah, blah. I'm hoping with this new one that this is going to be a long-lasting series. And the concept right now is a little bit interesting. And I know, Bill, you've read this too. And Jeff, did you get to read this as well?
Not yet, no.
No.
I'm going to look for
so
it.
I'm going to be spoiling it.
Yeah,
I'm going to be spoiling it. But I do want to pitch this book because I think that it's got a good promise. It's got an interesting, good premise to it. And that is X Factor's been reformed. You've got a character, Roger Broderick, who is working with General Mills in the U.S. Army. And General Mills, why, Mark Russell? Do we bring up this general? But anyway, Kellogg's, I guess, was busy. But it's just really an interesting idea that they're going to restart the X Factor, another government-sponsored team, but they're also going to bring in private sponsorships as a way of repackaging and rebranding mutants to a post-Krakoan world, where mutants up to this point had been, for the past 5 years, have been these, godlike figures on their own little island, running their own country and essentially saving the world with, pharmaceuticals and all sorts of things, and then twisted and turned into the world's worst villains when it came out that they were that they were immortal, and that the pharmaceuticals were then poisoned by Orcus and all sorts of things. So it's just like, mutants are terrible again. And so the idea is like, hey, no, we can have like a superhero team that we can control the message with, but also make mutants palatable again, just to kind of bring them back to the public. And of course, within like 4 pages, that's off to a bad start. They introduce themselves in sort of like a TikTok red carpet kind of way, and immediately are beset upon by 2 opposing teams of protesters. One group of protesters that's like, go away, mutants, and the other one that's like, all mutants that are like, you're an embarrassment. You're totally going against the whole idea of what it is to be a mutant in this country or in this world right now. and it's just not going over well. We've got the new team here led by Angel, who's also a co-owner, technically, by being a major sponsor. We have Rain again. We've got Fire Fist. And we have Cameo, who has shape-shifting abilities. And I can't remember the last... It's
something, yeah.
Zyber. It's basically Zyber. So kind of like a, iffy, maybe late 90s kind of name. Zyber.
It's worth mentioning Fire Fist is Rusty.
Yes, Fire Fist is Rusty. So, good old Exterminator's Rusty. Emotional issues and all. But basically, it doesn't go well. It's a bad introduction. And, so they have to be out there for their first mission. And their first mission, they have to go and fight this team called X-Term. I don't know where that came from. That's not a really great name. But anyway, X-Term is a group of sort of
Exterminate,
maybe, I guess. Yeah. But X-Term. Yeah. No, it didn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, Bill. You'll never... No, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, but it's Mark Russell. So you gotta look out for these.
It is Mark Russell, and I love Mark Russell.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they're essentially a group of mutant mercenaries that are kind of like an anti-X Factor. They're, extra national. They essentially are paid to do whatever kind of job that anybody wants to pay them to do. Good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. So of course the first mission is, okay, they're gonna go and punch X-Term, wipe them out, arrest them all. It'd be great, like a great PR move. And again, does not work out. They're completely outmatched, and things just don't turn out well for them.
Well, they do win, but at a cost. Let's put it that way.
I don't think they win at all. Nobody gets arrested.
Well,
they basically,
according to the metrics, they do.
Oh yes. So the ratings are good, and that's basically kind of the upside that they see to this. But it also shows that they, as X Factor, the members of X Factor, are disposable. And kind of going along with this narrative, we also have it also flashes over to Alex Summers, aka Havoc, who is now living with Polaris because he's not dead anymore. He's back from the dead after the events of Dead X-Men, and just the past 20 years of being shit on by every writer. So he's back alive, and he was even invited by X-Term to join their team at some point. But he doesn't want to do that because he sees them just as much as everybody else would. They're mercenaries. They're not good guys. He wants to be a good guy again. And in going along with that, he's also struggling with the fact that, in terms of Krakoan identity, he never really got into the fact that as a mutant, he was separate. He's always wanted to belong. And that's been a major issue for him, whether it's with his family, whether it's with a team, or whether it's just humanity in general. He's always wanted to be just one of the normal people. It just hasn't been possible for him. And, any crazy thing happens, Goblin Queens, whatever. There's always something going on with Alex. So he can't have that. Polaris, on the other hand, has really, embraced her mutant identity. In fact, she no longer goes by Lorna. She is not Lorna anymore. She's only Polaris. And they have a moment where it's like, you can't really be a part of the mutant race. You can't be a part of the human race unless you choose one or the other, and humans aren't going to want you. And you really need to be part of the mutants. But we find out, if he doesn't want X-Term, he's going to be part of X Factor again. And so, on the last page, we're reintroduced to the brand new X Factor team. It's a 31-page turnaround that's really quick. But I think it sets up an interesting dynamic for this team. Are we going to have a new team basically turning over every couple of issues? It's possible. This might be a longer-term thing with Alex at the helm. But it's Mark Russell. And Mark Russell's biggest thing when he deals with a corporate entity, which this technically is, he is going to rip it apart. He's going to expose the weakness because he loves writing about that. It's funny and tragic at the same time. and he's got a lot to say about sort of the idea behind, the ethics of this team, the ethics of what they, what they are trying to do. And of course, being in the middle of a social media blitz, can the team really live up to any type of standard other than what's popular? After coming off of Billionaire Island and, the multiple series that he's been doing for Ahoy Comics and for AWA. I mean, Mark Russell's just been everything that he's written in the past maybe 4 or 5 years. I've absolutely loved. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does with X Factor, which is very commercial, very X-Men-y property. And I also am curious to see how this will compare to what was the recent Ecstatics book? They just had 2 volumes of that came out with Mike Allred. What was it? Basically, they revamped the Ecstatics, which is
recently
called again? Yeah, it was within the past 2 years. They had 2 volumes.
Yeah,
Bill, I think he's asking you.
Yeah, no, he is. Yeah, but I haven't been following.
But yeah, I mean, that was really interesting, and it also took that sort of social media angle, but in like the extreme. They had, 2 Ecstatics teams that were fighting against each other in who could have the most views and the most likes, with Zeitgeist becoming a god if he got all of the likes. It's just very, very interesting, strange situation.
It's interesting
this is not
you
going to
bring that up, because I thought this was the most novel part of the book, was that kind of callback to the introduction of the Ecstatics version of X-Force.
Yes.
It's very much a callback to that. I read everything apart from that damn robots thing that that Mark Russell
which
wrote.
I loved.
And I didn't grab me in the first issue, and I didn't. But everything else in terms of the DC and Marvel work, I pretty much read. The thing where he has been very lucky is a lot of his stuff isn't bound by continuity. The Space Age and the Dark Age with Superman and Batman, and even something that is within continuity but is so quirky and to the side, like One Star Squadron. I think is it's like he's in his own sandbox. This has to connect, and I don't know if it was that made me whelmed instead of as he said, I was whelmed. Apart from really appreciating it, I felt a lot of the terrain that was, God, I said terrain like 3 times tonight. I'm sorry about that. But a lot of the landscape that he covered in this was covered better in Prez. There's a lot of there's alignment between Prez and this in terms of the role of social media and just basically the zeitgeist that currently exists right now. That the issue is numbered 1 is kind of a misnomer, because like this would be the perfect 0 issue given what transpires in the story. So I'm definitely going to stay with it. But this was the first time in terms of in terms of the books of his that I've read, and again, as I said, there's just one book that just didn't connect with me, and I just didn't continue with it. But apart from that, it's been everything. That I do think it's definitely going to be worth sticking around to see what happens. I thought the best parts of the book were the 2 pages with Havoc and Pearl Iris. I think those are without a doubt, because they're both Freudian bonus coupons. There's a lot up here that is just it's too much for one couple to handle, and it's always been that way. So it'll be interesting to see what transpires, because it looks like, though Polaris is not a team member, she does have a role in the story, so that's going to be interesting how that transpires, at least from the shadow, at least from whatever shading we have in the coming soons. So I'm reserving full judgment on this, but it's the first time I felt with Mark Russell that I've read this before, This is the first time I felt that way with him. So.
Well, and I think part of that too. I've been reading a lot of his output on AWA. So Rumpus Room and the one-shot Death Ratioed. Death Ratioed is specifically about the role of social media in in understanding what the self is in society, and like it's a very, very written large, just like that that Black Mirror episode where people downvoted. If they didn't like you, they would downvote you as a person. Death Ratio was specifically about that, where people could downvote you to death, and just death rate to ratio to death, essentially. But he's been talking about like how team dynamics work with personalities in Rumpus Room. That was a very interesting way of doing it. People who were, in a life or death situation and held captive, and how they interacted, how they worked together or didn't work together. And with the social media stuff that he's been exploring since Prez, I think that there's something here that could potentially be great. This was a good introduction. I want to see it go further. I want to see how he can play with this and not be too tied to, the greater editorial insistence of Tom Brevoort and, the X-Desk. So we'll see. But I did love the art. I absolutely have to say Bob Quinn did a great job with the art in this. It's just, very great character designs, beautiful line work. Jesus Bertov was on color, and Joe Caramagna was doing the lettering for this. And I think as a first issue, I think it was a great introduction. So
okay.
We'll see. We'll see what happens with it. I'm going to give it a big shot because, again, it has X Factor on the cover, and I have to X Factor. So, anyway.
Okay, I'm going to go over to the other one of the big two for my book. And Jeff, in your conversation, you mentioned that you had started reading Feral. The anchor story in this book, which is Super Pet Special Identity Crisis, is written by Tony Fleeks, who's the writer of Feral and also very much its spiritual cousin Stray Dogs. And what we have here, and Steve, I apologize that I did not bring this to you earlier. The main story, as you see in the front there, we have Bitewing, who is Nightwing's three-legged female dog. And interesting, this is the second time we brought up Kansas. Barbara and Dick Grayson are going to a wedding in Lawrence, Kansas. So while they are in state, they decide they're going to drop Bitewing off to stay at the Kent's farm. Okay. With Ma and Pa Kent. And the thing that is interesting about Ma and Pa farm in Smallville is that one of the barns also doubles as the headquarters of the Super Pets. And if you can see here, we've got Crypto, we've got Ace the Bat Hound, we've got Gleek, we've got Badge, the chipmunk, the second chipmunk, Green Lantern, we have Bat Cow, and we have Jumpo, Wonder Woman's Kanga. And they were all set to go on a mission, but it turns one of their members is missing, and that's Streaky. So they draft Batwing to become a new member to help them find Streaky. And Streaky has been kidnapped by Menagerie Man, who's, in a sense, like having this sort of Noah's Ark of super powered pets. And it's a very simple story. They go off to his ship where all these animals are. Bitewing is very smart, and he decides he's going to make friends with the villain Menagerie Man. Now, Menagerie Man was a one-time character in the Super Friends comic. So, and you can see this chest here. So there's interest, in other ways. And
he's got chest here. There's interest.
Basically, they rescue him, and then we're also treated to a page where basically every superhero character a superhero pet character in any form of DC makes an appearance,
That's
from
fun.
Wonder Dog, from the Super Friends to the Penguins from Batman Forever. It's all in there. It's a really nice tribute to the nature of the super pets. Why Batwing doesn't choose to stay a member of the Legion of Superheroes is a last page treat. So it's a very clever, fun story. Nice palate cleanser if you've been reading, especially after X Factor. Paranoia is on high. All right, I'll go to the animals. That's fine. There are other stories in this book. One presents the return of Jarrow, the Starro. The
one in the
Starro
jar.
that became in his head a Robin to Batman,
Right.
and he definitely was the best part of that friggin' Propecia. What was her name? Perpetua. That
Perpetua.
Yeah, that wasn't Propecia. There's a very interesting story in here regarding Damien's pets. As you know, Damien kind of collects a lot of pets between Jerry the Turkey and Bat Cow, the aforementioned Bat Cow, Titus, Goliath, from the more recent runs. It also ties into some of the issues that have been going on with Batman lately, with the loss of the fortune, and without them looking, the pets were actually sold to a biochemical company, a biochemical research company. So they're not happy with Damien. They make their escape because they're bat pets, but they're smart. But they leave it in a very interesting spot. There's a touching story with Dexter in his exploits as a Red Lantern, and what we have to assume might be a new home for him. Is a really touching story. Dan Waters is the writer on that. And then this one was disappointing, but it was clever. Who Woofs the Wolfmen? That's by Kyle Starks, and it's which is not a name I've seen. I know he's done stuff for Image, but I haven't seen that name a lot lately. But at one point he was, he kind of was like at least for a brief period, he was kind of like the Art and Franco before Art and Franco, with, at least in terms of DC stuff like Plastic Man and some other humor edged books. It was more clever than funny. So it was a bit of a disappointment. But for your standard one shot, this has some enjoyable stuff in there. And but without a doubt, the lead story involving Bitewing and the other super pets, that's a standout. So that's my book. And again, I said, Jeff, it does have a tie into one of the books that you're currently reading, and also some concepts that you might be familiar with from the past. So
yeah, I mean, Tony Fleek's actually writing something uplifting and fun. I mean, I loved Stray Dogs. The Strays. I thought it was just Stray Dogs. Yeah. I just thought it was so impactful for something that looked like it was right out of a Don Bluth cartoon with Trish Forster and his art together. It just looked like, this is a really fun book that's just filled with murder.
No, it's not.
I love that.
So yeah,
absolutely.
And the only reason I'm not reading Zero right now is I'm just waiting for the trade on that, because that's the way I really enjoyed. I so enjoyed more Stray Dogs in the collected format than in the single issue. So I decided that's how I'm going to go with Ferals.
Stray Dogs was one of those things. I just when I opened up the first page, I did not put it down until it was just. I just had to breeze through it and then flip back.
But those were long 4 to 5 weeks between issues. Yeah. So I think I'm doing the right thing with Feral. Yeah. All right, well, let's start wrapping this show up. And when we start wrapping,
what we have a book. Jeff, did you want to talk a little bit about Ruse?
He talked about Ruse. Oh, is there more you want to talk about Ruse though?
Yeah.
Oh, I covered.
Okay.
I feel good.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
All right.
All right. Yeah. Don't do that again. All right.
I had the image ready to go.
Yeah. Steve, tell Jeff your nickname for me.
Well, for him, boss. Yeah. He'll get that. He'll get that thing, and it's just sort of like, okay.
He just when he doesn't do as he's told, it upsets me. All right. So anyway, so we're going to start wrapping the show up, and one of the stops we have on the road to wrapping the show up is where we show off something called our Geek Gets, stuff that we may have gotten since the last episode, since the last time we joined you, that are somewhat in geek alignment with the geek world, whatever. Steve, I see you have a poster behind you. It was something that you're kind of known for at this point.
Yeah. So the new poster this week is Task Force 7, part of the Absolute Power collection of miniseries going around for the event right now. I have read the first 3 issues. I know, Bill, you read the first 2. It's from the villain's perspective for the most part. They are, it goes back and forth between the villains, the Amazos that are hunting them, and then the heroes that are on the run. They are very standalone-ish, but there is a single through story with Steve Trevor not breaking into, but essentially getting into Waller's organization to break it apart from the inside if he can. But yeah, for my other Geek Get though, I went and I picked up one of the DC Compact Editions. This one is for Batman Hush. The reason why I do not have Hush, it came out at the time that I was reading comics, and I also don't read a lot of Batman, but I felt like I probably need to read this because it's Hush and everybody loves Hush.
It's a cornerstone issue, yeah. It's a cornerstone story at this point. Yeah.
The one disappointment, obviously, this is what a lot of people talk about, the fact that it is compact, so they are smaller pages. The art is shrunk down a little bit, but it is all still maintained with the same aspect ratio. So you just might have to squint a little bit, I guess, but it's good. And then also, right before the show, I checked the mail and got a new issue of Drumsticks of Doom, and also
John
the
Westhoff usually tunes in.
Yep, and then the CPS issue with the Possessed and Confused one shot. So
okay, cool.
I thought it was kind of cool. Yeah,
very cool. And also, why don't you mention to people what the price point is for those DC books?
Yeah, the DC Compact Editions are all $10 a piece. So, and you can sometimes find them cheaper if you go to certain online distribution,
including Hamilton Book.
Yes, Hamilton Books has a few too.
Hamilton Book, yeah.
And they are coming out with more as the year goes on. There should be, I think, another 2 or 3 they're releasing in September and October. So
yeah. Okay. All right. I'll briefly go over. My Geek Gets are tied into an event that I went to this past weekend, which was Mego Meet. Mego Meet is in connection with the toy company. Best known for the world's greatest superheroes, the 8-inch line, but Mego did also a lot of other things. And there was a nice balance there between the classic Mego stuff from the 70s and early 80s with the newer stuff, and my purchases are along those lines. This was a toy line I never had, despite being a huge Little Rascals fan as a kid. So I could not pick up for the price that was offered Spanky from our gang. And then I had a pang of regret that I didn't pick up anything. So I went back to get Darla. Darla was sold. So I got Buckwheat. And then it was a 2-day event. And on the 3rd day, poor little Alfalfa was the only one left. And I decided to adopt him too. These came out initially in 1975. And 75, because that would have been the first time they had that logo there. And as I said, as a kid, I never had these for whatever reason. Don't know why, but now I do. And then in terms of the Remigo, again, the company in 2018 became active again. They're putting out new new 8-inch action figures. I get the DC ones as soon as they come out. Marvel is coming next year. So a lot of people are very excited about that. But I got some other characters. I got the Alice Cooper 8-inch figure. And just because you just can't pass up positivity, I also got Ted Lasso. So that was one of my gets at Mego Meet.
I would love for them to come out with a Nardwuar figure so you can put the Alice Cooper and the Nardwuar figure together on the show. Just,
yeah, I don't think
as a way of having them make up.
But there is Steve for you in one of the upcoming waves. I know they've had like Willy Wonka, but there's a property, and I will tell you offline what it is that I think you're going to be very excited about. But I can't say it publicly.
Sean Cody? No,
I can't say it publicly yet because it was whispered to me. So whisper. Okay.
I didn't know that Bear Films was coming out with their own line of Migos, but I guess it was.
Yeah. All right. Stop it. Jeff, do you have anything along these lines that you might want to show off?
I actually do, and I had it handily next to me, which was very convenient. But just last week, I got in because everybody loves Uno. I got in a Masters of the Universe Uno.
Ooh.
And the animation, the illustration is as such. And I was like, if you're gonna play Uno, have some fun with it, right? Battle Cat's there. Here we go. So yeah, I just happened to get that in, and like I mentioned, Matt's a big Master of the Universe fan, so I was like, this will be fun. Yeah, so got in some fun Uno cards that just a little something different.
That's fun. Motu Uno.
Thank you, targeted ads online.
They are evil, yet they are sometimes useful.
Right. They are evil and they get me.
But sometimes there's like, oh, that was an ad, and you never see it again. Every once in a while that does happen. All right.
Some you wish you will never see again, but you always see.
Yeah. So we're going to continue with wrapping up. And this is our final segment, and something we call the Woofs of the Week. In the bear community, if you find a fella attractive, you woof at him. And we do something very similar. We woof at something which may be a TV program or a film or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, or possibly viewer, may be interested in sampling. I'll start as I always do with Steve. Steve, what is your woof of the week?
My woof of the week is something that it's like recommending a train wreck with a lot of casualties. But I have to talk about it because I also love Tiger King. And that is the new HBO's documentary series, Chimp Crazy. Because it is insane and sad. And I turned to Jason when we turned it on, and I was like, this is going to make me very uncomfortable and mad and depressed and everything, but I have to watch it. And oh my God. Okay. So yeah, it is everything that Tiger King is without so far, a gay polyamorous, guy with a mullet. Instead, we have, a woman with very interesting wigs, and what looks to be surgically implanted fake eyelashes. But it is it's sad. I mean, it talks about obviously people who collect chimpanzees, and who raise them as children, who raise them alongside themselves as pets or as strange family members. And there's so much that we know now about people who own chimpanzees and the dangers that they are exposing themselves to, but also like the animal welfare questions, that it makes it very difficult to watch. Like, you see how sincere some of these people are, but then you also see the conditions. The that unfortunately the animals are kept in. So you're just sort of like, gosh, I don't know. I feel yucky. But there's so much to it, and it plays out like Tiger King. You just have to watch the next episode when it comes out. It is weekly on Sundays on HBO or available on Max. If you like Tiger King, you'll probably like this. If you hated Tiger King, you will hate this too. And by that, I mean hate watch this too. So,
Okay.
Jim Crazy.
All right. Over to Jeff. Jeff, what is your wolf of the week?
You guys. I don't know. I will give my wolf of the week to you guys. If anybody is watching this because I shared it and they have not watched you guys before, you guys are intelligent on it. You're good to listen to, interesting, and easy on the eyes. So you are my wolf.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll wolf you back. All right. For my wolf of the week, I'm going to go for the 4th season of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. This is a revival series that is co-produced by the original producers, Barbara Langley, and the same production company, Stranger Things. It takes a little different approach in that it only covers one topic through. But these are really well-made documentaries. This time around, we have episodes that cover the Mothman, Jack the Ripper, the murder that took place only about, I would say, 12 miles from here in the 1970s at Trent State College, which I had never heard about. Really interesting unsolved mystery about a severed head that was found in the early 80s in Pennsylvania, which may have been tied to a medical supply company. Again, these episodes are really well done. They're very haunting. There's one episode from the 2nd season about a lobbyist that went missing and then later ended up dead at my alma mater's dumpster. That I've watched that thing again and again. It just has a very well thought out way of presenting these stories, and like Unsolved Mysteries can scare the shit out of you when you were younger, and this still does that. Even if they're just talking about rounding the corner and opening a bag and there's batteries in it, there's always something it's like terrifying about the way that they present it. So that's the 4th season of Unsolved Mysteries reboot on Netflix. That's my wolf of the week. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find you on the interwebs, where would they go to?
I try to make it real easy for everybody. It is That Jeff Is Funny, and it's thatjeffisfunny.com. I figure if enough people have to say that Jeff is funny, it's going to make it true. So that's using Oprah as the gift.
Manifesting,
manifesting it through mass peer pressure. But yeah, please find me online, find me on Instagram, TikTok, say hi. And I love meeting new people. So I appreciate you guys having me on here.
Great. And
also definitely look for your comedy special coming up.
Yeah.
So on top of that, for people, are tickets still available for people that want to see one of the 2 films?
Yeah, tickets still available. Especially the first show's filling up on the 8th. The 15th still has a good amount of tickets available. So if you're in the area, you want to come out, definitely come out to it. It's going to be a great thing to be a part of. And then after I get it up on Amazon, I'll let you guys know, obviously, and we'll try to get people watching it. So,
all right.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I assume through Jeff, there may have had some people that normally don't watch our show or listen to our show. So thank you for joining us. Again, we have the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on most of the social media sites as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to listen to us, you can do so through Apple Podcasts, through Spotify, and many of the other podcasting platforms. If you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. If you have been watching us through Facebook Live, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, this also went out to Twitch tonight, correct?
Yeah, Twitch and YouTube.
Excellent. So please like and subscribe. And I guess until next time, I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
If you're listening to the audio version, you're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.